I first came to Burslem in 1960. Coincidentally, it was a time of quite a lot of change. You'd just come out of the austere 1950s, and you were just on the portal of this sort of youth revolution. And it was quite an interesting place then. I mean, the most dominant feature in Burslem in the 1950s, and before that, of course, were the potteries. You'd got pot banks everywhere. It's just like an army at bottle ovens. But these were slowly, well, not slowly, these were rather quickly going because they were being demolished, and the flatbed kilns were being used more and more and more, the electric kilns. So that was the first thing that I noticed, how suddenly Burslem went from being a grey, black and white place to becoming a very colourful place as the 60s sort of opened up. But the consensus then with the manufacturers that times were changing even 40 odd years ago, and that things had to change with them. And Burslem might be one of the towns of the potteries that would succumb to the new avant-garde. It was amazing. It had no less than four nightclubs. You imagine that now in Burslem? There isn't one. It had a massive dance hall called the Adult Ballroom. All these things were, new concepts. The other thing that was thriving in Burslem at that particular time was the School of Art. So the School of Art, quite naturally, had crowds of people from all sorts of places in the United Kingdom who'd come to study ceramics and textile and all the rest of it. You've got a very buoyant retail community, and the licensed premises. Well, there was one time when they said Burslem was the drinking capital of Stoke-on-Trent, and North Staffordshire for that matter. And I think these are the things that made Burslem an enjoyable place to work and to live. From then on, you see the decline of the industry, and of course, when you remove the manufacturing base, then you're really taking the heart out. The reason for Burslem being there, quite naturally, was because of its industry. That's just not Burslem; that's just the rest of the Stoke-on-Trent, for that matter. So I guess from that particular time, those people who I first met in the 1960s were probably right. Burslem, they weren't sort of soothsayers, they weren't fortune tellers, they were industrialists who sort of had their finger on the button. What they saw, I don't know, but what they saw certainly came true, because certainly we started to change. But you look around, I suppose, nowadays, and you think, well, where did it all go? Could we have done it differently? Could we have anticipated? Maybe these people in the early 1960s did, but could we all have anticipated? Could the city council have anticipated? Could the manufacturers have anticipated? Could they ever predict that the massive, giant Royal Doulton that employed some 2,500 people on site? It was a family business. Families spent their lives working there. The whole thing was generated for, family life, family orientation. Could anybody have ever predicted that would literally be wiped off the face of the earth in Burslem? There's 2,500 people immediately taken from your Burslem town centre. Could anybody have ever thought that Woolworths would have been disappeared? Not just from Burslem, but for all the town centres in the United Kingdom. There are obvious difficulties in coming to get grips, with change and the transition of being an industrial town to now becoming virtually, hopefully, a village community. It doesn't say that the pottery industry has disappeared, of course. It's just on the peripheries. We have Steelite International, which grew out of the Royal Doulton. We have the two Dudson factories, both still operate in Burslem successfully. Wade's still has a presence in Burslem. Burslem Moorland Pottery, which is a relatively new concept, which is doing great business, and its pottery is becoming quite renowned and collectible. We are regenerating in outlying places like Middleport, where renew programs, I mean, it does look at the present time as as an ongoing building site. It does look derelict, but hopefully, they have got it right, or it can be geared to be right. All these things, of course, are planned with regeneration. New roads, for instance, pedestrianisation. If we walk through Burslem today, we still have this magical, reachable history and heritage that very, very few towns have. Yes, it goes back to the Georgian period, the late Georgian period, but it very much has a presence of great Victorian civic splendour. I'd like to think that it has got a really big future. I'm sure it has. I think you cannot just build houses in Burslem and have them all occupied, and most of them are. I know we're living in times that are a little bit different, for people to get mortgages and things like that. But those houses are pretty popular. And you cannot just sort of say, okay, these are houses, and these are people who live in houses, without actually creating a community. So a community is slowly being built. And sometime in the future, that community is going to want to develop its own town. And it is going to be rather pleased that we kept some of the buildings and some of the artifacts that we were sort of helped to safeguard and preserve. So with that in their times, they're going to build a modern little town, my guess is, and they're going to value it, and they're going to become part of it. They're the new Burslemites, if you like.